October 2023, a team of researchers at the University of Virginia makes an announcement that sends shockwaves through both the scientific and spiritual communities. After decades of studying near-death experiences, they claim to have found something that materialist science said was impossible: measurable evidence that consciousness can exist independently of the brain. But here's what's going to mess with your head. The proof they found isn't what anyone expected. It's not glowing energy leaving the body. It's not electromagnetic fields or mysterious particles. It's something far more subtle, far more profound, and somehow far more terrifying than any religious text ever described. What I'm about to show you will either validate humanity's oldest belief or reveal the most elaborate self-deception our species has ever maintained. Because the question isn't just whether we have souls. It's whether what we call a soul is something science can even recognize when it finds it. By the time this video ends, you'll question not just whether you have a soul, but whether the very concept of you makes any sense at all. Stick with me because we're about to dive into the most controversial frontier in neuroscience. And the answer might be hiding in the last place anyone thought to look. Welcome to my channel. What you're about to hear connects cutting-edge neuroscience, quantum physics, and 4,000 years of human spiritual experience in ways that will fundamentally challenge everything you think you know about consciousness, death, and what it means to be alive. Let me start by taking you inside the research that's causing all the controversy. Dr. Sam Parnia at NYU Langone Medical Center has been doing something that sounds like science fiction, studying the consciousness of people who are clinically dead. For over 2 decades, he's been documenting cases of patients who flatline, no heartbeat, no brain activity, no measurable signs of life, yet somehow return with detailed, accurate memories of what happened while they were gone. But here's where it gets weird. These patients can describe conversations that happened in other rooms, recall specific details about medical procedures performed on their unconscious bodies, and provide information they couldn't possibly have known if consciousness was purely a product of brain activity. One case still gives researchers chills. A woman in cardiac arrest for 23 minutes accurately described a surgical tool that fell behind her operating table, something she could only have seen while clinically brain-dead from a perspective that should have been impossible. Traditional neuroscience says this can't happen. If consciousness is just neurons firing, then no brain activity means no consciousness, period. But the evidence keeps piling up, and it's forcing scientists to ask a question they never wanted to confront. What if consciousness isn't produced by the brain at all? What if the brain is more like a radio receiver than a generator, and you exist somewhere else entirely? This brings us to the most controversial theory in modern neuroscience. Dr. Eben Alexander, a Harvard neurosurgeon who was a committed materialist until he had his own near-death experience during a week-long coma, now proposes something that would have ended his career a decade ago. Consciousness might be a fundamental property of the universe, like gravity or electromagnetism. In this model, the brain doesn't create consciousness. It filters and focuses it. Think of it like a radio tuning into a specific frequency. The radio doesn't create the music. It just receives and plays what's already broadcasting through space. If this is true, then what we call the soul might not be some mystical energy. It might be the universe's inherent capacity for awareness, temporarily localized in biological systems. But here's where quantum physics crashes the party with evidence that's even stranger. Recent experiments in quantum biology have discovered that biological systems, including neurons, operate using quantum mechanical effects that shouldn't be possible at the warm, noisy temperatures inside living organisms. Quantum coherence, the same phenomenon that enables quantum computers, appears to be happening in microtubules inside brain cells. Dr. Stuart Hameroff and Sir Roger Penrose have proposed that consciousness emerges from quantum processes in these microtubules. processes that could theoretically maintain coherence even after clinical death, at least temporarily. If they're right, then consciousness might have quantum properties that allow it to exist in states that classical physics says are impossible. But the most mind-bending research is happening in laboratories where scientists are trying to measure something that might be impossible to measure. Dr. Duncan McDougall's famous 1907 experiment claimed to weigh the soul at 21 grams, the amount of weight supposedly lost at the moment of death. Modern scientists have dismissed this as flawed methodology, but new research is taking a more sophisticated approach. Teams are now using quantum sensors to detect changes in electromagnetic fields, gravitational measurements, and even quantum entanglement patterns at the moment of death. And some are finding anomalies, tiny, barely detectable changes that happen at the exact moment of clinical death and can't be explained by known biological processes. These changes are so subtle they're almost within the margin of error, but they're consistent, and they happen at the precise moment that many people report leaving their bodies. Now here's where this story takes a turn that will blow your mind. What if we've been asking the wrong question entirely? Instead of do we have souls, what if we should be asking, are we souls having a physical experience? Consider this possibility. What you call you, your sense of being a continuous, unified consciousness, might be the universe experiencing itself through a temporary biological filter. When that filter breaks down at death, you don't cease to exist. You simply stop being localized to one particular body. This would explain why near-death experiencers often report feeling more real, more themselves than they ever felt while alive. It would explain the accurate perceptions during clinical death, and it would mean that the boundary between you and not you is far more fluid than we've ever imagined. But there's a darker possibility that researchers are discovering. What if consciousness isn't individual at all? What if what you experience as your thoughts, your memories, your personality are just temporary patterns in a larger field of awareness that connects everything? Recent studies on psychedelic experiences, which many researchers now believe provide a window into the fundamental nature of consciousness, consistently report the dissolution of individual identity and the experience of being connected to or identical with universal awareness. If this is what consciousness actually is, then the death of your brain doesn't destroy you. It just dissolves the illusion that there ever was a separate you to begin with. This brings us to the most unsettling implication of all the soul research. If consciousness survives death, if awareness continues beyond the body, then every person who has ever died is still, somewhere, still experiencing, still aware. The 107 billion humans who have lived and died aren't gone. They're in a state of being that our living brains can't even conceptualize. Think about that. Everyone you've ever lost, everyone who ever lived, might still exist in forms of consciousness we can barely imagine. They're not in some distant heaven or hell. They might be right here, experiencing reality in ways that our biological limitations prevent us from accessing. But here's the twist that will keep you awake at night. What if the research is pointing towards something even stranger? What if individual souls are real, but they're not what we think they are? What if your soul isn't your personality, your memories, or your sense of self? What if it's something far more fundamental? Some researchers now propose that souls might be quantum information patterns, stable configurations of pure information that can exist independently of any physical substrate. In this model, your soul is essentially a self-sustaining pattern of meaning and relationship that can persist even when the brain that hosted it dies. This what makes souls simultaneously completely natural. Information is a fundamental feature of physics, and completely unprecedented in our understanding of what kinds of information can exist independently of physical systems. We might discover that souls are real, but they're not personal in any way we recognize. They might be more like cosmic algorithms, patterns of information processing that temporarily inhabit biological systems to experience physical reality. So, where does all this research actually lead us? Here's the truth. We're still nowhere near proving the existence of souls in any traditional sense. The evidence is intriguing, the theories are fascinating, but we're dealing with phenomena at the very edges of what science can measure and minds can comprehend. But something profound is happening in the laboratories and hospitals where this research takes place. Scientists who started as committed materialists are confronting experiences and evidence that don't fit into our current understanding of reality. The old certainty that consciousness is just brain chemistry is cracking under the weight of persistent anomalies. Maybe we're on the verge of the greatest discovery in human history, proof that consciousness, awareness, the very sense of being that you feel right now is something that transcends individual brains and individual lives. Or maybe we're just discovering new ways that our brains deceive us about the nature of our own experience. But consider this final thought. Right now, as you're listening to these words, you're experiencing something that science still can't fully explain. You have the subjective experience of being you, of being aware, of having thoughts and feelings that feel like they belong to someone. Whether that someone is a temporary arrangement of neurons, a quantum information pattern, or something that will continue after your body dies, it's the most remarkable phenomenon in the known universe. The fact that matter can organize itself into patterns that experience their own existence is either the greatest mystery or the greatest miracle we've ever encountered. So, do you have a soul? The research is still out, but the question itself, the fact that you can even wonder about your own existence, contemplate your own mortality, and search for meaning beyond the physical might be the most soul-like thing about you. The scientists are still measuring, still experimenting, still trying to catch consciousness in the act of transcending the brain. But while they're looking for proof of the soul, maybe the soul is what's doing the looking. What do you think? Are you just complex chemistry that will end when your brain stops? Or is there something about your consciousness that science hasn't figured out how to measure yet? Let me know in the comments, whether those thoughts come from neurons, quantum fields, or something beyond both.